If you feel fight this we make
Where's that? I know that. Why are you going to space first? Look, who's that? Oh, she's so cute. She was a baby. That's so cute. That's true, Oscar. Yeah. When I was a baby. That's me when that's Tilda. That's Tilda. Yeah. I used to have one of those. This has Papa's feeling. Steal it! Look, that's me. Look, that's me and Mommy. That's me. Look, I'm right. That's so funny with Pop. I am. Hey, Pop! Pop! Say Pop! Yeah, I know. Oh, no. Julia and Pop! Daisy, no! Daisy, I can see you.
Hello and welcome.
Daddy.
On behalf of Gloria, Robert, Alan, Janelle, and the rest of Graham's family, I'd like to warmly welcome all here today to celebrate the life of Graham Alfred Burton. I'm Alex Burton, grandson of Graham, who I will refer to from here as Pa. I'd like to make a point straight off the bat today. This is a celebration of life. Pa has led a long, rich, and happy life, surrounded as always, as we are today, by love. As someone not far off 40, it strikes me that I'd be extremely lucky for life to play out just like Pa's has. When I think about all of the experiences, the achievements, the passions, and the joys that Pa has had in his life, we have so much to be thankful for. So today, we're going to hear stories about a life really well lived. Married to my grandmother Gloria for over 70 years, 3 wonderful children, 7 grandchildren that made him proud, mostly. That's a reference to me. And 5 great-grandchildren that made him smile from ear to ear. A long and fulfilling career, many passions and pursuits, sailing, golf, tennis, plenty of holidays, countless dinner and dress-up parties where Pa was in his element. Firstly, my father Alan will touch on Pa's early years, growing up sailing, the war years, and his career with Coles. Pa's eldest son Robert will then talk about one of Pa's great loves, sailing, and the competitive sportsman that Pa was. Janelle will then give us insight into the family man and the numerous friends that he and Gloria collected as they moved around the country over the years, and most recently just over the bridge in Ocean Grove. Dylan and Harriet, that Pa has left on the younger generations of their family. How proud he was of our chosen pursuits, his interests in our hobbies, his utter joy in experiencing being a great-grandfather. The family truly appreciates the turnout today. People have travelled here from Melbourne, Sydney, Dubbo, Harvey Bay, just to be here. We have a number of people dialing in as well, including my cousin Andrew in Boston. Amongst us today, we have sailing buddies from the Royal Melbourne Yacht Club, neighbours and friends from Gloria and Pa's time in Glenwaverley, former colleagues from Coles, and from more recent times from Probus Club, wine and walking clubs. I'd now like to hand over to my father Alan to say a few words.
96 years is a long time. I'll just try and share you a bit of a timeline of Graham's life. He was born in Alphington, and his parents, Robert and Myra, and his father was a naval engineer. And after completing his 12 years in the Navy, he got posted to the Garden Island Dockyard as an engineer in Sydney. And then very soon after that, because of the approaching war, a torpedo facility was set up in an old gasworks in Sydney in Neutral Bay, and that became the subsequent submarine base in Sydney. They lived in Kirribilli in Allemang Avenue, just over the road from water. So Graham always had a view of water, and he was introduced to sailing at a very young age, initially mucking around over the road, and then later joining 12-foot dinghy sailing club. He had a couple of mates, one a guy called David Walker, who was sent out from the UK as a refugee from the war in England, and another guy, Merv Wood, who he did a lot of sailing with over the years. Graham got given a push bike. It was a very big deal by his father, and he used that to deliver telegrams and groceries in the hope of saving up for a boat one day himself. One memorable anecdote of those years was when Graham was sailing off Watson's Bay with his mate Merv Wood in a 12-foot skiff, and they rounded the Watson Bay pile light capsized. And in those days, normal boats had buoyancy, so they were left sort of in this semi-submerged boat drifting on the outcast towards Sydney Heads. They drifted over the anti-submarine nets, and they were ultimately picked up by a naval corvette minesweeper. Graham people on board that his dad worked for the Navy, and they fed them and then dropped them off back at Watson's Bay and dropped the boat back. A sailing mentor of Graham's called Bill Mann rang his mother and told him they're going to be a bit late home. So they had to catch a tram from Watson's Bay into the city and then a train to Milson's Point and then walk home for half a mile and got home at 8 o'clock. And I know Graham, when he told me the story in the past, he had a fair bit of explaining it to his mother on that occasion. A bit later on, he had a quarter share in a cadet dinghy, and in that time, he and his friend Merv were sailing on Sydney Harbour, and there was a freighter in port that had been hit by a torpedo that had an enormous hole in the side of it, but it hadn't sunk. And so Graham and his mates would sail up to him, half paddled and half sailed, and snuck into the hole inside the ship and fly around inside the ship, just checking out all the twisted burnt metal and the smell of fire, and then made a quick exit when someone very forcibly suggested from the deck above that they better get out of there. When he got a bit older, he and Merv did dancing classes up at Milson's Point, which proved to be an important skill for Graham later in life in the Victorian. In 1942, Graham joined the Air Training Corps and was in training throughout the war, but the war finished before he saw any active service. At that time, they commented on his flat feet when he was being assessed for suitability for the training corps, and the officer was impressed when Graham said, I'm here to fly, not march, so don't worry about the feet. I was just going to share with you an anecdote regarding the Japanese mini submarine raid on Sydney Harbour. When I was a child, my grandfather had these relics from one of the Japanese mini submarines, which we only ever occasionally got to see because it was a bit secretive. One was a brass plate with Japanese symbols on it, and that was used to set the depth of the torpedo. And the other was a pressure gauge from the mini sub. And when after the raid on Sydney Harbour, the Japanese mini subs were brought into the torpedo base and to be examined. And my grandfather's job was to take apart one of the unexploded torpedoes and to assess Japanese technology to feed back. But there was also a lot of souveniring went on at that time, and that's how those items came to my grandfather's possession. So later on in life, I discussed with Graham a few times how I thought, gee, these things should really end up back in the warm water, shouldn't they? And eventually Graham said, I'd really like to take them back to the warm water. So I quickly organised a trip to Canberra and off we went, met the curator of the mini sub exhibition. And he was quite excited because Graham was living in Bellarmine Avenue over away from the harbour that night. So he was very keen to hear from Graham what it was like that night and what he heard. And Graham was describing all the depth charges going off and the gunfire and all that sort of thing. And he was really taken back when Graham told him the story of a friend of his father who's a naval diver. He was one of the first people to dive down to one of the destroyed submarines and found the dead submariner's service revolver and took it home as a souvenir. But then he got the gilts that night. He'd sort of cleaned it up, and so he handed it in the next day. And the curator of the exhibition's eyes lit up, and he said, "Quick, come in." So he took us into the exhibition. Here in the glass case was the revolver. So that was quite a good trip. Post-war, Graham had initially worked for G.J. Coles as a sort of as a storeman and a clerk, and he went back to them once he got discharged from the Air Force, and was sent initially to stores around Sydney and in regional Australia. And he was at Cootamundra for a couple of years as an assistant store manager, and then the second year in Victoria, which is where his dancing skills came in. Subsequently, he was engaged and married to Gloria, and was sent to Leeton in New South Wales, where Robert was born. And then, as a theme throughout his life, he was sent all over the place with work. Back to Sydney, up to Lismore in New South Wales. And interestingly, Graham was just talking to me recently when the Lismore floods were on again. He said, it almost floods there. When he first went up to Lismore, he had to go via a casino because it was flooded. And the store he went to had an upstairs storeroom because it always flooded. So nothing's changed. He came back to Sydney as a New South Wales food buyer for Coles. And then the next year, he was off to Melbourne to work in the head office as a national food buyer. In those years, we had a number of family holidays in Mullinlook in New South Wales, which I think I was 2 or 3 the first time I went there, that it was a focus of family holidays. And subsequently, my grandparents retired down there, and that became the destination for many of our family trips. After working in Melbourne for a while, Graham was sent to Adelaide and then Brisbane, and then eventually back to Melbourne when I was in year 10. In Adelaide and Brisbane, he managed to continue his passion with sailing, which Robert's going to talk about. The proudest thing that Graham talked about in his working life was when he established the farmland brand in Coles, which was on his initiative. And as it happened at that time, he was aiming to have the best quality at the lowest price, and he achieved that, and was very happy about that. He retired from Coles after 44 years of working for them in 1987. He continued on his sailing journey and eventually came to Ocean Grove in 2013. He instilled in me the value of hard work. He made things and he fixed things, and I've learned from that. And he was very family orientated, as Alex alluded to, and loved hearing about what everyone was up to. Thank you.
Yeah, just indulge me for a moment. Is that working?
It's all good.
G'day, Andrew. G'day. I'm glad you could join us from the other side of the world. Just looking around here, it strikes me that the number of people here say so much about the esteem in which Graham was held in a very wide demographic. Most people fortunate enough to live well into their 90s have outlived most of their friends and contemporaries. And this is quite different. Firstly, a special thank you to Alan and Janelle family for their parts in organising this memorial to Graham. And also a special thanks to Janelle and Greg for asking me to spend a couple of weeks here to assist our parents' needs while they had a much needed holiday. As things turned out, I was able to spend 12 days straight with my parents visiting at the Epworth Hospital and a couple of days at the most amazing nursing home. This opportunity to spend so much time with Dad in his final days, I'm sure grateful for. Now, back to the script. I've been asked to speak about sporting prowess. Now, this tennis, golf, cruising, etc. appear to me at least to be about exercise and socialising. Win, lose or draw wasn't important as the fun time spent with friends and family, whereas sailing was his true lifelong sporting passion and brought out the true competitor in him. On water, winning was everything, no quarter given or expected. I think only those who have crewed for him fully appreciate the intense competitive characteristic of this. My first memories of sailing were in an 8-foot snub-nosed dinghy on holiday in Foster, north of Sydney. A great time for a 7-year-old. We don't mention the overhead phone line brought down by the mast, thinking it could stay up while we dragged it home from the beach. That sort of just disappeared. I think we rang and said somebody must have knocked it down. Now then we moved to Victoria. No boat there, it was freezing. Then to Adelaide, where we raced a Gwen 12 named Red Wing. Number one enemy there was the current state champion, sailing Scud 4. He had the latest stainless steel mast and sails, and a heavy forward hand, much older than the skinny 14-year-old that Dad had. We came close occasionally, but no cigar. Then to Brisbane, where we continued to race the Gwen on the Brisbane River. Memories there were, of course, taking us past an abattoir that pumped blood straight into the river. Plenty of sharks. We never capsized there. Dad purchased the Javelin 14 to replace the Gwen from a surgeon in Sydney who had built it for his son, who apparently lost interest in it, so it came up for sale. It was a work of art. Dark blue hull, cedar decks, ash trim, a much faster boat, along the lines of an 18-foot skiff without the wings, and 2 crew rather than 3. A lot harder to keep upright too. Then back to Melbourne. A 24-year-old trailer sailor named Wavelengths was completed in the carport at home and raced out of the yacht squadron. It had a cabin and was much drier and warmer than the skiffs. Memories were starting a race. This is embedded forever. We started a race in a growing Melbourne northerly and were behind. So we were asked nicely to put up a spinnaker. With a considerable amount of effort and quiet engagement, this task was achieved. The boat took off completely out of control, rounded up, spread us in the water, staggered back up, took off again, followed immediately by a violent Chinese jibe that snapped the spinnaker pole as it hit the water. The 4 crew set as one I've changed this slightly. Well, thank goodness for that. We recovered the sail as the race was abandoned and many boats were damaged. Later in the club, we discovered that the wind gust of 70 miles an hour was recorded at the clubhouse. It's the first time I've ever seen a sea turn completely white. The keelboat named Indecision was purchased from the New Zealand boat builder John Lidgard. It was his personal boat. And what a great name for a racing yacht. This boat was campaigned for quite some years and was a very competitive lightweight 30-footer and a joy to sail. Along with retirement came Dad's chance to fulfill his ultimate dream of sitting down with John Lidgard and designing and building his ideal boat. That had been evolving in his mind over the decades, I think. Inspiration was the result. A comfortable cruising yacht that sailed well. On time, I'm really pleased he took the time to kick back and spent time cruising to and around the Whitsundays. It inspired me to do the same many years later for 3 or 4 months each year. Much easier sailing from Harvey Bay. Others will have to take up the story from here. I had a young family to spend time with and took a break from racing, watched from a distance as Graham became more involved with the club, becoming Vice Commodore and eventually Commodore of the Royal Melbourne Yacht Squadron. It was a life well lived. And it'll be sadly missed by all.
I'm going to speak a little bit more about friends and all the activities and things I got up to. So I know many friends are here today. So Graham and Gloria collected friends along their life journey like precious pearls. Their friends became their extended families. They befriended their neighbours wherever they went, with dinners, drinks and chats on both sides of the fences. So as you've heard, each time Graham was offered a promotion at Coles, it was usually in a different town or city. So off they went again. And I think Robert gets the prize for the most number of schools attended, with 10 schools in 10 years in 4 different states. And whenever I went to visit, Graham would spin me around, take my coat, a drink would be thrust into my hand, all in about the first 30 seconds. The next question would be, and are you staying for dinner? Invariably, my clothing would be inspected and complimented. So I always made sure I had my lippy on to visit Mum and Dad. And I still will with Mum. So I can remember tennis picnics in Tacoma and the Dandenongs, at the Coulson's house, at the Gearin's house. We also joined local tennis clubs and participated in absolutely everything on offer. And back to dancing. So dancing was a big part of Gloria and Graham's lives, and I believe how Graham won Gloria over with his dancing prowess. He did take lessons to make sure, and I think there's a photo of the Deb Ball rotation. And I can remember doing various dances in our large lounge room in Waverley. The Spanish Flea to the Tijuana Brass, foxtrots, waltzes, the Charleston, the tango, 50s rock and roll, and Dad taught me to do swing dancing, and then they progressed on to the Nutbush in the 70s. Graham had rhythm. So much so that many ladies loved to dance with Graham when they went out, and Gloria had to elbow a few out of the way. I also remember older Graham at a family wedding when he couldn't balance to dance, but he leaned on a table and did some upper body grooving. And golf. So Graham was a member at Huntingdale Golf Club for many years and continued to play on Mondays and Thursdays in retirement. And one of his friends from that time, Clive, actually just popped in the other week to see Graham and share a yarn and a joke. The Coles Old Boys luncheons, and I think some of the Coles Old Boys are here. Graham loved attending the Old Boys lunch for the food, of course, for the company, and the yarns and the jokes. We're very grateful to Keith Quayle for driving Graham and often Gloria to these occasions, and Gloria would catch up with the girls. So I've learned a little about grief in recent years through my work in mental health, through friends' experiences, and now, of course, I'm on a steep learning curve. A recent speaker for Compassionate Hearts on the Bellarine, so that's an organisation some of you might have heard of, said, "Grief is love with nowhere to go." So we're here today to share that love and to shower Gloria with lots of love and hugs. And if you would like to go on the hugging roster for Gloria, see me afterwards. So Gloria has a lot of love with nowhere to go. And lastly, Graham would enjoy writing a poem or two for a special occasion. So here's a limerick for Graham. There was a young man named Graham. At tennis and golf he did slam. But his true loves naturally were Gloria, dancing and sailing the open seas. Friends and family are grateful for the happy mayhem.
Thank you, Mum. My name is Dylan, for those who don't know me or more likely don't recognise me. Yeah, that's right. That's me. I'm just going to talk really briefly about some anecdotes around Pa's impact on Nick and I, my brother Nick, but also all the grandkids, as a craftsman, a woodworker, a tinkerer, and a gadget lover. From a very young age, he'd take every and any opportunity to instill his wisdom onto Nick and I, and we couldn't get enough of it. How everything worked, the pool pump, the sprinklers, light switches, it didn't matter. We loved it, and he was delivering his things. And he would also build things for and with us. I think the best example was we had this little playground at our house in Queensland, it's still there, and somehow he convinced Mum and Dad that we needed a block and tackle pulley to get heavy objects up on top of the monkey bars. I'm not sure how that happened, but it was great. We had a great time. It was great fun. And Nick shared another anecdote about him and Pa building a little model balsa wood boat where Pa taught him how to use a jigsaw and a bunch of tools, which I think had an impact. And over time, I think a pretty beautiful transition happened where Nick and I grew up, we studied, became engineers, and the tables turned on Pa, and suddenly we were the holders of some wisdom that he didn't have. And he was so eager to drink it all up, you know. He just wanted to learn. He was always asking us about our studies, our work, the latest problems we were solving, how and why we were solving them. Career specifically, we've heard a lot about his career, very career-focused, hard worker, and he just loved hearing about, you know, what I was working on, what I was working on, and how my boss was, what my inspirations were, when I was going to run the company. Yeah. And I think he was really proud of all of us grandkids by the end. We all have had great careers and adulthoods that he loved hearing about. Nick, a few years ago, described him a robotics university project that he had to work on in great detail. Pa was not an expert in robotics, as you might expect, but it didn't matter. He was there, he was listening intently, he was being insightful and helping Nick, you know, design, plan, all the rest. He was stuck right in. And I've heard other similar stories from the other cousins as well. But all this is to say, he wasn't still a bit of a tinkerer himself. Even after the move to Ocean Grove, he was dead set on his memoirs he was writing for Rob Allen and Mum. Learned how to use the computer, Word, emails, scanner, printer, and he smashed it out. He did really well. I mean, there are a lot of phone calls and visits to help him out, but I think that was just an excuse to have a chat, and it worked well on both ends. So that's really all. Look, today Nick and I are tinkerers, and that's because of Pa's influence a whole lot. His joy and insight throughout our whole lives, and I'm really thankful we got to spend as long as we did there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I've had the good fortune in sharing in Pa's life. I've journeyed through life and speak today as one of Pa's 7 grandchildren. I'm Harriet. I'm the 3rd child of my father, Alan. So it's hard for me to imagine Pa starting life as a baby, loving parents Tamara and Robert, or a teenager staring down the possibility of deployment in World War II. A young man marrying Gloria, the love of his life, or even as a young father to Robert, Alan, and Janelle. For me, Pa, he was always Pa, a grandfather and a gentleman, albeit rather cheeky in both. Pa was an attentive and indulgent grandfather. He had a magic and sparkle that never dimmed. Christmas was Pa's time to shine. With a Santa hat on, he would joyfully hand out everyone's presents, never losing enthusiasm for the treasured holiday. Sorry. Pa would sit at the end of the table, first to get into the Christmas crackers, tell the silly jokes, and wear the paper hat. Grinning and laughing like a kid, he was always the life of every family gathering. As a child, he made me feel seen and important, steering his yacht and taking us sailing and teaching us the rules of yacht club decorum. He terrified me as an 8-year-old that I'd have to somehow find a way to shout the entire Royal Melbourne Yacht Club a drink if I dare walked inside with my hat on. As an adult, I've grown to understand the pride he had in the family that he and Gloria created. He was interested and eager to share his wisdom, wanting to ensure everyone was successful in their respective parts. Not to be left behind by the younger generations, Pa would like to keep up with the times. I recall an excited phone call when I was at university that Pa had just bought a computer and a printer. He then told me that the internet was coming in the post. It wasn't long after this that I received another phone call, slightly less excited and more harassed Pa, who told me that the printer wouldn't stop and could I help. You probably should have directed that phone call to Nick or Dylan, not me. I told him to turn it off. In recent years, Pa became a great-grandfather to Oscar, August, Daisy, Matilda and Poppy. And he brought the same love and joy to the next generation and delighted in the role. The kids particularly enjoyed whizzing around the house on his walker, and Pa would really enjoy that, laughing along, and was happy to go without the walker to indulge the littlest members of the family. Pa was a shameless and boastful grandparent and great-grandparent. We could quite literally do no wrong. No achievement was too minor to be celebrated. Well, today, Pa, we celebrate you, the ultimate adventurer, emulating capability, strength, love, and good, although sometimes quite rude humour. You're a gift to your family. You are loved and missed.
Thank you to everyone who spoke. Thank you to everyone who is here today. Before I wrap up, I'd like to make a few specific thank yous and acknowledge the groups of people. Firstly, the Burton Golf Club and the team here, who are always a pleasure to deal with. Thank you very much for today. We'd also like to sincerely thank the staff and residents at Seaviews Manor, where Graham and Gloria stayed for 3 weeks. Graham was beautifully cared for, as was Gloria, and any family and friends that visited during that 3-week period. I'd also like to thank Pa's sailing crew and those that have sailed with him over the years. One of his great loves, and we've heard a lot about that today. We have a condolences book. We'd like it to be a little bit more than that, so please write down your anecdotes or stories about Graham. And just as part of it, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. I'm going to miss Pa's jokes, his quick off-the-cuff cracks that would leave everybody in stitches, but none more so than him himself. I really enjoyed visiting Pa in recent years when, as you've heard from Dylan and Harry, he not only had a computer, but he had an iPad. Despite his newly badged status as a digital native, and for reasons unknown to me, he would often print off funny emails that he'd been sent to show anyone that it visited. Aside from a wicked sense of humour, one thing that I've always bonded over with Pa was work. As a grandfather, he was so invested in our careers, as you've heard. He was always proudly telling me about my cousins and their numerous accomplishments, or asking about my sisters and how their work was going. During university, I did an internship at an outdoor clothing manufacturer and wholesaler, and Pa was very, very excited about this. This was a space he understood. So he was very keen to provide me with some wisdom, and he wrote pages and pages of notes and diagrams about warehouse distribution and shelving and how to run a stock take, and it all went over my head and I was totally uninterested. But what was a little bit more up my alley was marketing, and I think he may have been a marketing genius. I don't think anyone's clarified this for me, but I'm keen to talk to the Coles group about this. He pitched me a promotional idea that involved a pack of 3 socks. To clarify, not a 3-pack of socks, but a pack of 3 socks. Pa would have wanted today to be a happy occasion. He always wanted everyone around him to have a really great time. He had boundless energy, charisma to burn, and as you've seen from the many twinkle-eyed photos here, he was a handsome devil, and by far the most photogenic fella in the family. He loved a party, and I'm sure he is disappointed not to be here. He was one of the all-time great hosts. He would have wanted us all to share a drink and a number of stories. I heard once someone say that everybody dies twice. Once when our bodies can no longer go on, and again when our names are spoken aloud for the final time. If that is true, then looking around the room and the love that isn't here for Graham, then Pa will live on for a very long time to come. I'd now like to invite you all to join us for afternoon tea and to celebrate the life of Graham, a life very, very well lived. Well played, Graham.
You don't want to make noise now.